Welcome to Navigating a Broken Vessel. I'm Dave Harris, and one of my favorite shows in the 1980s was The Golden Girls. And I know I was pretty young. I was, 5 to 10 years old, somewhere in that area, roughly in the middle of the 80s, right about the time that show was on. But one of my favorite things is when the older woman, Sophia, that sounds like her name. Yep, she would say, "Picture it, Sicily, 1927," or whatever, right? That's how I'm going to start today. I'm going to say, "Picture it, Hurricane Utah, 1997. Dave, a young man who just returned off his mission." Okay, so that's the idea behind it. When I came home off my mission, I didn't have a cell phone. I started in video production. That was my job when I came home from my mission. And I was lucky to basically get hooked up with a really awesome person over in Hurricane by the name of Steve Lemon, who is just an amazing person. And I got into video production in the late 90s when I came home from my mission. And I didn't have any technology, didn't have any phone or anything like that. The internet, of course, was relatively young, things like that. I hadn't even used the internet. I might have mentioned on a previous episode that I thought that email wouldn't even take off. And I thought, this is dumb. Why would anyone use this? And of course, I was wrong. Now, 1997, I started in video production with Steve Lemon over in Hurricane. And after a couple years of working there, he provided me with a pager. And that pager then was how he would communicate with me. And that pager then was my technology. That was the first, I've got technology with me. And of course, pagers and even cellular phones have been around a long time. My dad had a cellular phone in the mid 80s. It was a mobile phone, or a car phone, I guess is what they called it back then. But I had a pager now. And I would get a page every once in a while from Steve Lemon asking about things and having me give him a call, things like that. And of course, as I got to know Shelley, she would also use the pager because Steve Lemon allowed it, right? Because we had like 100 pages a month and there was no way we would ever use that. So Shelley would page me every once in a while as well. Now, that was my technology until 2001. Now, I'd been married for a year and was now living in Salt Lake City. And as part of my job in Salt Lake City, I actually got a cell phone. And so I had a phone. It was a dumb phone, right? All the phones back then were dumb phones. And so I had moved from a pager, which just put in a phone number, that's all it did, to a dumb phone, which allowed me to text and make phone calls. And then at about 2007-ish, somewhere in that area, I was able to get my first actual touch screen phone, a phone that I could actually browse the internet and things like that. Wasn't my favorite phone. I think it was the LG Dare is what it was called. And it wasn't the most awesome phone. And I tell you, I had that phone for a couple years. The iPhone had come out and I'd never used an iPhone. And I thought, I've already got a touch style phone. I'm good to go. Now, I'll tell you, when I used an iPhone for the first time, though, I was like in heaven. I'm not a total Apple fanboy, even though I've got a lot of Apple stuff. But I can tell you that the iPhone just worked so much better than that LG Dare that I was using. So now I have an iPhone, and I have had an iPhone ever since that time. So that would have been around 2009, 10, somewhere in that area. And here we are, 2026. I've had an iPhone all the time since then. And it has destroyed my life. How about we put it that way? It's destroyed my life. Maybe it's destroyed your life, right? So let's talk about my thoughts on how this phone, this iPhone, this smartphone has destroyed my life. And then I want to talk about why is it like this? Why is it that it has destroyed my life? It can do so many great things. As we know, an iPhone allows us to be available 24/7, right? We can browse the web at any time. We can use social media at any time. The math teachers in high school that said you'll never just have a calculator with you all the time are totally wrong. And now we have a calculator with us all the time. It has tremendous capabilities. And of course, with AI, now we've got whatever AI our desired desires, whether it be Grok or Gemini or ChatGPT or whatever it might be, we've got all those AIs right here at our disposal as well. So now, why do I say it's destroyed my life? You might think it's destroyed your life too. Maybe you will agree with me and maybe you won't. But I really just look back at young Dave, just coming home off a mission, with his pager and thinking, Dave was available 24/7 back then. As soon as I got that pager, I was available 24/7. That was the idea behind it, is that I could get a page, and my expectation would be, or the expectation would be, that I would make that phone call, and therefore I was available 24/7. With phones, of course, we're even more available. We expect to answer things. We expect to be fully aware of what's going on with the world. We get up in the morning, and the first thing we do is check our phones, verify that we haven't missed out on anything. That fear of missing out, right? That FOMO, fear of missing out. I have thought a lot about this, a lot, the last couple months. I've thought a lot about my phone use, the use of my iPhone, and so forth. I've even told Shelly, I've said, I really think the best thing we can do for our children is get them dumb phones and say, here you go. Here's your dumb phone. You can text, you can call, but you can't do anything else. And that's really a good way to go. And I've thought about that for myself. And of course, as soon as I start thinking that, as soon as I start having that discussion with Shelly, my wife, it's always this, well, wait, what about this? And what about that? What if we want to send an email? Or what if they want to check this? Or what if they've got a question about such and such, right? And we always talk ourselves out of it. And I think back, and of course, all of you probably think back the way I would and say, well, we did this when I was a kid, right? And that's the funny thing about it is when you say, well, back when I was a kid, right? We always make fun of that. But yeah, back when I was a kid, we didn't have smartphones and we had to use a payphone, things like that. I totally get it, that that's not the best way to go. Now, I can tell you, I thought a lot about what I was going to talk about during this episode. And I thought, I'm going to pull the trigger on this smartphone thing. And so on Friday, today's Monday, on Friday, I talked to Shelly. I said, hey, Shelly, I am going to use the screen time feature on my phone. I'm going to completely turn off all of the capabilities of the phone, except for the ability to call and the ability to text. And then I thought about it. I'm like, well, wait a second. I also need to make sure I have my email, and I need to make sure I have my calendar. And I started immediately thinking about all the different things that I definitely needed to have. And I tried to talk myself out of it, but I didn't. And I ended up saying, okay, I'm going to have her enable screen time on my phone. When I say have her enable it, what I did is I enabled it and I handed it to her when it came time to do the passcode. I said, here, put a passcode in. That way, anytime I need to use something, I need to get your passcode. That way you and I can talk about it. And so she put a passcode in and I'm like, okay, great. It's working now. So here is how my experiment went. Just to give you an idea of how this went. The first time that I started to use an app that I didn't have access to because of screen time, it of course said, hey, you don't have access to this. You're in your focus mode or whatever it was that it calls it. You don't have access to this app. And so I thought, well, I need to have Shelly look at this and put in the 4-digit code. But then I looked at it and there's actually another button that says ignore screen time. And I was like, okay, so I tried it. I pushed ignore and it said, do you want to ignore it for 15 minutes or for all day? What do you want to do? And I was like, what the heck? So I clicked ignore all day and it gave me access to the app that I didn't have access to. And I thought that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard of. Right? The whole purpose of screen time is to limit your screen time, not just make it so you just have to push one extra button before your screen. I guess it's two extra buttons before your screen time is back enabled for that particular app. And that was true of every single app that I had limited. I didn't even have to talk to Shelly. I didn't have to have her put her 4-digit code in. I just clicked it and said, yep, give me access to it. So then, of course, I'm talking myself into accessing whatever it is I wanted to. Well, maybe, should I be on YouTube? Well, I'll just go ahead and enable it just for now. I'll just limit my time on it. It'll be okay. So in other words, it failed miserably. Not only that, but this morning, as I'm trying to go to work, I work remotely, as I've talked about in past episodes. I've got computers that I use, and those computers, of course, had the screen time limits on them. And so every time I tried to do something for my work, it would say, you don't have access to this because of screen time. So finally, I told Shelly, I said, hey, I've got to turn off this screen time thing. It was a miserable failure. It did not work. It's not going to work. What's the passcode? She gave me the passcode. I turned it off. And now I'm back to this. So what's the take-home message on this? Of course, the take-home message is maybe screen time is not going to work. So if you think that that's a great solution, maybe it won't work for you. Maybe the take home message is you'll tell Dave through email or through a message on Facebook or Instagram, hey, this is actually how you can actually make this work for real if you really want to try this out for real. Maybe the take home message, though, is something I remember learning about when I was working on my PhD about a decade and a half ago. The concept that I learned about is called technological determinism. Technological determinism is a theory that says that technology moves at its own pace, independent of humans, and that we basically are following along with what technology is doing. Now, you might argue against that and say, well, of course, humans are involved in the inventing of technology. It's not technology that invents itself and then we follow along. But if you really think about it, technology really drives a lot of what we do. Absolutely, it does. I know this for a fact because I know that 25, 30 years ago, I did not get up in the morning and immediately find a TV that I could turn on. I did not find a radio that I could turn on. In other words, it wasn't something like a phone where I'm like, okay, I'm awake now. I better pick this phone up and I better start accessing it and figuring out what's going on. And so I know that I've changed as a result of technology. In other words, technology has said the first thing you must do in the morning is get up and check your phone. When you check your phone, you should check the social media and see what's going on out there in the world. You need to check your email. You need to check your calendar, whatever it is, your messages, anything that have come in, right? We have that compulsion now to be dictated in what we should do by that technology. So that technological determinism says, this is what you will do now. Now, furthermore, there's this idea with technological determinism of unintended consequences. And I'll tell you a story about this. This is the story that I come up with. It's kind of a, you might be like, wow, that's kind of a morbid story, but that's the way it goes, right? So here's the story with regard to unintended consequences. I remember, 15 or so years ago, that the highway folks started installing what are called cable barriers, right? So in between the lanes of traffic in the median part of the freeway, if it wasn't a concrete barrier, they would install these cable barriers. It was these three really large diameter steel cables that would be held up off the ground about 3 feet or so, and by these support structures, these metal support structures. And the purpose of these cable barriers were or are to make it so that cars don't move from one direction of traffic over to the other direction of traffic, because a head-on collision is a lot worse than some other types of wrecks that might happen. So the purpose of the cable barrier is to restrict cars to the direction of travel that they are traveling in on those lanes of traffic. And these cable barriers, they work fantastic. If you've ever seen the demonstrations of how they work, or you've seen highway cameras that show how they work really, really well. They're really good at keeping cars where they need to be. They're stretchy, they're disposable, they're easily fixed. There's all kinds of great things about these cable barriers. But I remember one time I'd passed by an accident involving a motorcyclist, and that motorcyclist was killed by the cable barrier. And I thought, wow, if that cable barrier wasn't there, that motorcyclist may still be alive, right? The cable barrier is what killed the motorcyclist. Maybe he would have just slid into the median and whatever and been just fine. I don't know. Maybe he would have been killed anyway. I don't know. My point is that the cable barrier is what killed the motorcyclist. That would be a great definition of an unintended consequence. Now, you might argue and say, well, the cable barrier saves so many lives that even though it causes the death of some people, that's probably an okay trade-off, right? Because it saves so many lives, even though it kills people, right? Because it literally does kill people. Because of the cable barrier, people have died where they would not have died if there had not been a cable barrier there. We could probably think of all kinds of examples of unintended consequences related to technology. I don't think I don't think when the iPhone was invented by the folks over there at Apple, Steve Jobs and whoever it is that might be involved with that, I can't imagine that they were thinking the best thing we can do is make it so that people will immediately pick up their phone in the morning and that they will be addicted to social media and that they will, all these other things that are these detrimental aspects of technology, right? Maybe they did. Maybe they thought, hey, I'm going to make a lot of money if these people are addicted to their phones, right? Old Zuck, right? Mark Zuckerberg, probably pretty happy that people use Facebook and all kinds of stuff all the time, right? I even know of a lawsuit, right? I get ads on my social media that say, "Hey, there's a lawsuit. If you feel like you've been addicted to Facebook or to YouTube, you can actually sue Meta and Google, the folks that bring that to you, because there's a class action lawsuit that they are using these addictive practices, and you could make $1,000." And I think to myself, first of all, I'm like, wow, $1,000, that's pretty cool. Then I think, wow, $1,000 for 15 years of me being addicted to this phone, I don't think it's worth it. And I think that that's sad. Uh, I remember, again, as a communication professor, being told and telling students, if you're not paying for a service, then you are the service, right? If I'm not paying for Facebook, if I'm not paying for YouTube or whatever it might be, then it is my eyeballs that are paying the bill, right? My attention that is paying the bill, and therefore that attention is what is required. All right. So, what's the point of all of this? Tell a story about how I have evolved in my technology. I've tried to make it so that I can use technology to limit my use of technology, and then talking about technological determinism and unintended consequences. What's the point? My point is, I don't think that technology is the answer to help us with a problem related to technology. I don't think that we can depend on things like screen time, focus modes, and things like that. I don't think we can say, I really need a technology based solution to help me with my problem. What does that mean? I think it means that I have to be solely responsible myself for these things. I can't allow screen time to dictate when I can look at my phone. I just have to make decisions on my own. It might be getting rid of apps. It might be deleting them off the phone. It might be just like we talked about. Maybe I talk to Shelly and say, hey, I'm doing a dumb phone and that's all there is to it, right? You might say, well, wait, is that a technological solution? It's not. It's getting rid of technology. Now, even as I say this, I know I can hear you all over there because I can hear it in my own mind. I remember as a kid, fifth grade, sixth grade, learning that there were people my age and the families didn't own a television. And I remember thinking that is so weird that someone would go through their life and not own a television. And we thought these kids were crazy, right? How do you not watch TV? Matlock is such a great show, and Knight Rider and the A Team and whatever, right? How do you not have a television? And so I know that many of you are like, how do you not have a phone? You must have a phone in today's world. And that may be true. But the responsibility for how we use that technology, we cannot depend on the technology to make those decisions for us. That technological determinism that we talked about, right? It has to come from here. It has to come from our own ways of thinking. We are the ones that have to make decisions, and we have to actually physically and positively determine what it is that we want out of this technology. We should have discussions with our significant others. We should have discussions with our children about it. I even have these thoughts myself. And at some point, I have to pull the trigger and act and say, I am going to get rid of these things and it's going to be forever. I can tell you for the last 6 months, as I've been doing this podcast, I have thought a lot more about how I think. It's been a really good thing for me. Over the last 6 months, I have really tried to implement these sorts of solutions, deleting things that are weighing me down, not looking at Facebook all the time, not looking at Instagram all the time, all of those things that are just things that weigh me down. I have made it so that notifications are not, they're not enabled on specific applications. In other words, if I don't feel like I must know about something, I've turned those notifications off. I can tell you, this has helped me immensely, immensely. Even this morning, when I looked at my phone, I didn't look at it first thing. I looked at it when I had to go potty, right? There you go. Looking at it for the first time after about 25 minutes of being awake, looking at my notifications, and I could see that I had some email that came in overnight, and I had a couple of Slack messages that came in, and there were a couple of other little things. But it was a tremendous experience because there were like 10 notifications, and I was able to get rid of them for the first time in my life. Just swipe them to say, yep, I'm aware of this. And I got my notification center to be completely empty. And it, even to the point where I started swiping around on it, trying to be like, wait, where did my notification center go? And it said, hey, you're done. There are no older messages. You're good to go. It was like a weight being lifted off of my shoulders. So I started with that, right? I got rid of apps that I thought just weigh me down. I got rid of notifications that I just really don't need to know about. I don't need these things constantly reminding me of stuff. Those are things I've tried. For me, it's a continuum. If this is the continuum and over here is like a complete lack of technology, and over here is like technology determines everything you do all day long, I want to move this direction. I don't necessarily want to get rid of technology altogether, but I want to be moving that direction. It has helped me immensely. I definitely invite you to give it a try, right? Just try and get rid of certain things that are parts of technology in your life that are frankly weighing you down and are not helping you in any way. I can tell you that it has helped me a lot. I would love to hear from you about this. I really feel like you have some comments because I have no doubt that you probably agree with all of these things. You're like, yep, it's really bad. And at the same time, I can't live without it, right? If you don't think that way, great. Talk to me about it. Dave at navigatingabrokenvessel.com. That's the email. Navigating a Broken Vessel on Facebook and on Instagram, but don't do it all day long, right? And then, of course, the website, navigatingabrokenvessel.com. You can look at episodes, past episodes, and so forth. I really do want to hear from you on this one because I want to know your thoughts. I would love to know your solutions. Anyway, thanks so much for joining me on Navigating a Broken Vessel, and we'll see you on the next episode.